Welcome back to News Talk. Coming up for you later this hour, Sam Ford with a preview of this weekend's events marking the 20th anniversary of the Million Man March. Hard to believe it's been 20 years. Right now, though, back to our conversation with former Northern Virginia Congressman Tom Davis and Dan Scandling, former Chief of Staff to Virginia Congressman Frank Wolf. Phone lines open here at 703-387-1020. We're talking about the leadership turmoil in the House. How and when does it get resolved? What does it mean for policy going forward and for President Obama's agenda? 703-387-1020. What do you make of all that's happening right now? Those of you watching live in the 11 a.m. hour can join the conversation with our two great guests. We hope you will. We'll go to the phones as your questions and comments come in. John Boehner forced to stay on. No doubt that he'll be the speaker until at least the top of the leadership question gets resolved.
He said that, and Governor Kasich has postponed calling an election in Ohio to fill that. I don't think he's filled out a letter resigning. So here's the irony. Is the longer Boehner stays, he can clean up, well, he says clean up the barn. He can get a debt ceiling bill through that will be really something disadvantageous to the conservatives that are holding this thing up. They're actually hurting their own agenda because Boehner right now has no bounds in terms of being able to go with the Democrats and cut a deal, deliver 40 or 50 Republicans, and get some of these very tough issues off the table for the new speaker. That's the irony in this.
It is an undeniable irony, and the sense of the speaker wanting to leave was palpable.
Yeah, the speaker's ready to move on. Do you blame him? I mean, and look how the chaos that's followed. And I just don't know where they're going to go from here. I don't know how long this is going to drag out. They've got to come up with a consensus candidate. If it's not Paul Ryan, who's it going to be? And it's only going to drag on longer and longer. And it's going to add to more dysfunction. And I think the presidential candidates, I think the Senate is all going to still really get wrapped around the axle on this because Republicans came saying, we can run this town. Well, it doesn't look like it now.
When McCarthy backed out, why didn't they just elect Jason Chaffetz? Or why did they hold a vote? Let me rephrase. Why didn't they hold a vote with the other candidates who'd expressed interest?
Well, they don't have the votes to win. I mean, Mr. Issa has even said that he's taken on Chaffetz. I mean, there's a history there on the Government Reform Committee. And Mr. Webster from Florida, he could get the 40 votes from the Freedom Caucus, but he's not going to get the rest of the caucus to support him. There's too many other members that are also fed up with some of the stuff that's been going on. The demands being made by the Freedom Caucus, some of them are pretty over the top. Again, like I said, to talk about no deals from the Senate, to say that outside groups like the Chamber can't play in primaries. Well, they can't have it both ways. You can't say that we, the ultra-conservatives, can go call you a rhino and try and take you out and then come back and say, but you can't mess with us. You can't have any outside groups say that we're too conservative. It doesn't work that way.
Tom, help us understand how, it's great to have your views and to feel like your constituents are behind you 1,000%, and to find soulmates in Congress and to get in a room with those people and be emboldened by one another. But our politics have always been about getting to 218, getting to 60 in the Senate, getting a bill on the president's desk and getting it signed. In between elections, shouldn't there be some period of governing, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum?
Bruce, we've evolved into parliamentary behavior, but it's not a parliamentary system. That's the best way to put it. Voters now vote the party, not the person. When members come to Washington, they behave like it's a parliamentary system, and that means instead of being the minority party, you're the opposition party. Instead of being a minority shareholder in government, you're just straight no. And within the caucuses, these members are just responsive, basically, to talk radio, to groups that make up a majority of their base party in their districts. They're responding to their constituents. I mean, we see Donald Trump and Carson emerging as the leaders, and a lot of people are saying, what's going on? Well, that tells you where the grassroots of the party has moved. These members are responding to that. You have to understand that. You have to take that into account. I get constantly asked, do you miss it? And my answer is, well, look, I left undefeated and unindicted. That's as good as you're going to do in this business. And the answer is, do you miss high school? I mean, I'm very glad for the years I served in Congress, for the things I was able to accomplish. But why would you want to be there at this point? It's like, if you ever get serious again, give me a call. This thing has just degenerated down now to the point of chaos, and it will take extraordinary leadership in Congress and in the White House to try to bring things together, and we're just not seeing that anywhere right now.
Was it Rahm Emanuel, who said that or someone even prior to him at a higher level, who said every crisis is a great opportunity if you can figure it out.
Crisis is a terrible thing to waste. That's what I think Rahm said, and that's true.
Is that this for the White House?
Well, we only act in crisis. Members are very risk averse, as you can imagine. So in crisis, then that's when things happen. You have to respond to a crisis. TARP was a crisis like that. 9/11 was a crisis that brought people together temporarily. It's complicated, but we have a very divided country, and the Congress reflects that. Just for the record, they went 133 ballots back before the Civil War one time for Speaker Banks, when it stretched out 9 weeks. So we've seen this before in this country. We had Bob Livingston resign, if you remember, and he was already elected as the caucus pick. Decided he didn't want to be Speaker, and they ended up with Denny Hastert very quickly in coalesced. Party will get through this, but whenever you lift up the hood and look under the hood in a democracy, it's never very pretty.
Dan, can you pick up on Tom's suggestion that this gives the Speaker a substantive opportunity to do more of that clearing the barn?
Yeah, they've got major issues coming up. The debt limit, another government issue on funding. They've got to deal with the highway bill, and the Speaker can go freely and work with the Democrats to pass these bills, and also the Republicans who are in town that want to get something done. It's about compromise. It's about governing. It's not just my way or the highway. It just doesn't work that way. Look, I worked for Frank Wolf for 15 years. People call him a rhino. How can you call Frank Wolf a rhino? He is a conservative. Is he an ultra-conservative? No, but he is a conservative. To sit there and start making this delineation between establishment conservatives and conservatives makes no sense. Some of these guys are way out there, and that's okay if they're representing their districts, but they have to understand not everybody in the country is where they are.
And it's interesting because 18 months ago, we were reading that the chamber community broadly had reached a sort of point of being fed up, and they were going to start to invest in people who believed in moving things along, even if it meant bills that weren't identical, the perfect, that the good was better than nothing. And yet it seems like we're more stuck than ever, that the turmoil, that the Civil War rages more intensely than ever.
And one of the conditions of the Freedom Caucus was that the Speaker has to tell the chamber it can't do that. Can't have it both ways.
And the Speaker couldn't do it if he wanted to.
Exactly.
The Chamber's not going to listen to him. Look, there's a lot of turmoil because parties are ultimately coalitions. And if you're a majority coalitions, you have a wider coalition of people that you have to try to move together. The difficulty of what's happened is the money has moved away from the parties. They've taken away the earmarks, which used to bind people together because you could get projects for your district and give you a reason to vote for things.
Right.
You have media models now that thrive on polarization. It's their business model to get up there and hammer every night, talk radio and the like, and members respond to this. And then they're in these single-party districts where you get no benefit from compromising. You only get punished because primary voters are generally a pretty thin ideological slice of the electorate. The end result, what do you expect? And so it'll take extraordinary leadership. Ryan is well situated if he will step up to it. I certainly understand if he doesn't. The next tier down, you have some very able people, but the same problems that haunted Speaker Boehner are going to be with them.
If Ryan doesn't step up, who do you think is most likely? And then, separate question, who would you most like to see?
Well, look, I think Peter Roskam is viable. I think Trey Gowdy, very well respected in there. You talked about the former Chairman Issa. There are a number of people that I think, if you got them to the floor, could probably hold 218. But the caucus is not a hard right caucus. It's a right of center caucus, and the majority of the caucus is pretty fed up with these 40 members. You have to understand that. They're not steering the caucus, they just get a veto.
How much is emotion a factor? The sort of emotion Tom just referenced.
As far as right now, I think everybody's just kind of taking a deep breath and trying to figure out where they go, and I think there's a big wish that Paul Ryan will come in and save them. I'm not sure that happens.
And then how long does he save them for? The first time you have to put up a tough bill on the floor, members start scurrying back to their corners again.
How much does this impact 2016? The general sense that a lot of power was pushed onto the GOP side?
As somebody who went through impeachment, which was very unpopular, and we came back and held the House and so on, it shouldn't have much impact on 2016 unless you let this drag out. what you're going to find is this presidential race will suck up all the oxygen very, very quickly, and the Republican nominee will really set that agenda. A good Republican nominee, if he wins, can hold this together, I think, a lot better with the power of the White House. That's what the Republicans need. But they're a grayed out party. Governing is a tough business, and I think if the Republicans win, they'll have the House, the Senate, and the presidency for a short period of time. And then I think it becomes, in many ways, more complicated.
There was a member of the Freedom Caucus on NPR this morning. I think he was from Florida. I cannot remember his name. Part of the beef he expressed was with the process, the ability to bring amendments to the floor, perhaps even the ability to get bills voted on. Dan something from Florida?
Dan Webster probably, who's a former...
No, somebody else. I'm blanking.
Okay.
I apologize to be blanking.
But that is a problem.
But to the point, can one or both of you speak to the procedural things that cause people to be angry with Boehner and may have spilled over onto McCarthy
well,
too?
Look, you keep a lot of tough amendments off the floor to protect members from having to vote on divisive issues.
Well, immigration was that. The Senate immigration.
Exactly. And on this, I mean, be careful what you ask for. You might get it. And I think particularly of immigration, if you put the right immigration bill in the House floor, it's going to be something conservatives, the hardcore at least, don't want. So it's a tricky. You know, Harry Reid kept amendments off the Senate floor so that it ended up defeating some members because you had members running for re-election, been there 6 years, and were never able to offer an amendment. He did it to protect his members. So we'll see. I think you'll see some procedural changes as a part of this. I think open rules are generally helpful, but when you have an open rule and anybody can offer any amendments, your majority doesn't control it because at that point Democrats play a much larger role in the process.
Final thought, Dan, a prediction on when all this gets resolved? Or at least the Speaker. I know the other elections majority leader, depending on who gets.
If Paul Ryan doesn't make a decision this weekend, I think it could really drag out. I think you could be talking several weeks before they coalesce and find something out. But if Paul Ryan makes a decision, which I think will come quickly, you know, you'll go from there. But if not, I think it'll go a while.
And of course, if McCarthy stays and the people below him stay, then you don't need elections for those other posts, presumably.
And Bruce, let me just say, I would have let this thing play out on the floor, let members vote against him, and let it drag out. It's ugly, but it kind of pulls the mask off the Lone Ranger on these members, and I think at the end of the day, the pressure of McCarthy probably would have succeeded.
And I think it's important to point out, you know, there's 2 Freedom Caucus members that have already left the caucus.
And as a protest?
Yes.
With, who knows, we'll see if more follow. Dan Scandling, Tom Davis, great conversation, important issue. Thank you both very much for being with us today. We'll step aside here. News, the forecast, and a whole lot more coming your way right after this.